The founder and president and CEO of Artists at Large. That's at with an ampersand. So Carly Schmitt is a public artist, as I said, and an artistic entrepreneur. She has a small art business under which she executes large-scale public art projects and curates various community-based artistic initiatives. Yeah? That's a long sentence. Okay. She holds a BA from Manchester College. I think that's college meaning American, meaning
American
university.
College. Yeah.
English, Manchester University.
Oh,
Malchester University.
Scholarship.
And a scholarship. And an MFA from the Bauhaus University in Weimar, Germany. Miss Schmitt is best known for her work that blurs the conventional boundary between art and life through a variety of artistic approaches. Her public artwork aims to span gaps, build bridges, and bring people together through a system of unexpected circumstances and extraordinary context. Miss Schmitt's work can be encountered throughout Europe and the United States. Anything you need to add?
No, you did a lovely job.
Okay, thank you. Can we just have a big round of applause for Miss Schmitt?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for waking up this morning to come sit in this room and listen to me talk about some crazy art things that are going on in the contemporary art world. As was just mentioned, I'm a public artist. And the top question that I've been asked throughout the week is, what exactly is public art? So public art for me, I actually started doing things like this. I'm trained as a painter, so in the beginning of my career, did a lot of very large paintings on the outside of buildings or inside buildings. I'm a mural artist by trade. And through this process, I became really interested in the potential that this sort of artwork has to bring people together. The process of art making, I think, is really important. And a good example of this is actually a project that I finished last summer. This was a project that I did in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota. And this project was called Make Your Mark. And the idea with this project is that these two mosaic panels are actually composed of about 11,200 small 1-inch wooden tiles. And the population of the town that I was working in, it's a small town, was actually 12,000 people. So the idea I had for this piece was I would really like to do something that challenges this very strong idea of the individual that we have in American culture. And I would like to create a work in which we ask the entire community to come together for one artistic, creative purpose. And we're going to do it in the name of art. And of course, many people talked about it and validated it in different forms. Many people said, you should become part of this because it's history. But what I asked for people to do was to come together and personalize a little 1-inch square tile. And I don't know if you can see, the lighting is maybe a bit hard. But each of these squares is actually individualized by either a person's initial, a little drawing. It's a very small canvas, but a canvas nonetheless. So we put this incredible challenge out in the community. Can we get all these people to work together for one common purpose? And it was a huge amount of work, but in the end, we did succeed. And we actually did manage to get all of these pieces personalized. And this action of creating an artwork together, you're also creating a space in which people come together, meet each other, initiate conversations that they may not have ever had they not been in this particular artistic context. It's kind of, I wonder if I can go back. Yeah, it's funny because when I'm applying for projects, additional projects with this idea that I presented in this work, this is always the image that I send out. It's the final image of the work. But really, what I think is most important about the work are images like this, the images that show the 8 months of work that it took organizing events, working mostly as a community organizer to get people to come together, to start conversations, and to work together towards a common goal. So this is what I do in the public art realm. I work directly with people, I work within communities, and I like the process of creating something together. The question that's probably on your mind, which is of course a question that's also on my mind constantly, is why is this art? And And in my culture of creating public art, we also have some sacred texts or important writings that we always refer to kind of validate what we're doing and to back up what we're saying. And one of those texts is a text called Relational Aesthetics by Nicolas Bourriaud. And in this book, he introduces this idea that there's a trend in contemporary art where artists are frustrated with the fact that we have so many material possessions already. And these artists are saying, why do we need to produce one more thing? Why do we need to produce one more picture to put on a gallery wall that no one, or a very small percentage of the population, is actually going to see? And he also makes a comment that in today's society where technology is becoming this media that connects us and, facilitates this conversation, people are actually becoming much more separated. So, we live in a time in which we're more networked than ever before, but actually at the same time, you have 500 friends on Facebook, but how many of those people do you actually talk to on a regular basis and have an actual genuine connection to? In my case, it's very few. So, that playing with that kind of idea. So the major idea behind relational aesthetics or relational artwork is the idea that bringing people together to start a conversation or just create an interaction is in itself an artwork. And I bring this work into the conversation, an artist called Rector, because he's kind of, when you talk about relational aesthetics, and especially when you relate it to food, his name always comes up. And what he did in 1992 is he was commissioned to create a show in a gallery in New York. He went into the gallery, he went into the back room of the gallery where they keep all of those mysterious things that galleries have, but they don't want you to see. He took all that stuff, threw it into the gallery space, and then in the back storeroom, he created a very intimate kitchen. And in this kitchen, he cooked his form of Thai food. So his story is actually, he's born, I think, in Thailand and then moved around a lot. He lived in Argentina, he lived in Canada, he lived in Ethiopia. And as he was living in each of these places, he picked up little pieces of the culture. And so in this work, he cooks his own interpretation of what Thai food is as sort of a social lubricant, which brings people together, gets people talking, gets people eating together, and creates a social interaction that, like I keep saying, would have not existed in another context. And what's happening now, the trend in contemporary art that I see is a lot of artists are kind of riffing on this idea of relational aesthetics and not necessarily keeping that art project and process in the gallery space, but instead taking it out in the street and really bringing it to a completely different audience, an audience that really has no strong connection to art that takes place in a gallery setting. And this is a work that I would like to present as an example of that. This is a work by Michael Rakovitz called Enemy Kitchen. And he is I guess you could say first-generation American. His mother is from Iran, and I think his father's from Israel. So he has this Jewish, Iraqian heritage. And what he's doing with this project is actually bringing groups of people together in a workshop situation, and they are cooking his mother's recipes from Iraq. And so he's creating this workshop where people of all walks and forms are coming together, sharing a food experience, but also using this open space and this platform to talk about what are the cultural stereotypes going on. It was particularly important in 2007 when he started this because the United States was in conflict with Iraq. And he did it purposely to kind of combat all of these stereotypes that we were encountering in the media, axis of evil and all of these things like they hate us because of our freedom. He wanted to take these things to the table and say, I have a very personal connection to that community, and let's talk it out and see how it can lead to a greater understanding. And the title of my paper was, it's an emerging diplomatic tool. Interestingly enough, last night when I was kind of checking my facts on the internet, I found the newest extension of this project, which just came out last Sunday. So it's still very fresh. Last Sunday was actually the 9-year anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. And in honor of that, he launched the newest phase of this project, which is, as you can see on the right-hand side, it's a mobile kitchen. So it's this idea of packing this whole cooking experiment into a truck, a food truck, and this form of selling food has actually become very popular in the United States right now, because it's obviously much cheaper to buy a truck and put a kitchen in it and then drive to a street corner and sell your food there, as it would be to have a solid store that you're paying rent on and that sort of thing. So people are using this. And he's adapted it sort of to an artistic form for artistic means, and he's curated an interaction that's going on in the kitchen, actually, in this. And so the way he set it up is that he has Iraqi refugees cooking the food with veterans of the American Army as sous chefs. So they're helping to cook. And so there's this interesting combination of people in the kitchen that have seen two very different sides of Iraq and this Iraqi conflict. And then they are taking it out and selling it to anyone that's hungry. And the quote that I have here is, this is actually from Michael Rakowitz. He says, "The poetry inscribed in the notion of consuming the enemy," which I think feeds right into actually what you're going to say next. But there is something really interesting about this, the way in which we use food kind of as the introduction to a culture. And this idea of what does it mean to consume a different type of food as consuming a culture. So I think that's a really interesting idea. This is a project that's also sort of similar. It's called Conflict Kitchen. It's taking place in Pittsburgh. And this is not the mobile cart, but this is actually a storefront. And with this storefront, the image of the storefront and the food that they're selling changes every 6 months. And they're highlighting different places that the United States is currently in some sort of a conflict with. So they also started with Iraqi takeout food then they did Afghani takeout food. Now they're doing Venezuelan takeout food. And in addition to making and selling food with a mixture of refugees from the community in the United States, they also do workshops. And they host conversations. And they really try to create a platform where people can learn about not just the food, but also the people coming from these cultures and many different perspectives on what is the conflict and what is actually going on in this conflict space. Another way in which this is done is, you can see the OSS Kitchen. That is actually the wrapper that the food is packaged in. And that has, if you read it, it's actually interviews with refugees coming from the conflicted country or people that are living in that country that wanted to say something about the situation there. So by reading this wrapper, if you were to just find it as an artifact, that would actually give you a really interesting perspective, perhaps a different perspective than you get from the standard media, about what's going on there. And it's the perspective of the people that live there, which is something that I think, sadly, we often miss out on. The interesting thing about both of those projects, I think, is that in order to finance themselves, they are selling their food, which on one side is a very clever way of maintaining your artistic practice. If you have this income coming in, obviously you don't need to go to other ways to find funding to allow you to do that. But I think with relation to food, it also raises an interesting question. Because food is very oftenly used as a gift. It's one of these very basic gifting items. Let's share bread, let's sit down and share a meal. You know, oftentimes there is that gift element to it. And I was really interested in that. And also as that relates to the idea of providing aid to a different country. Well, actually, there's a number of different reasons that I came up with this next project. This is actually one of my projects, so I can talk a bit more personally about this one. So I've been living in Germany for maybe about 4 years now, and I moved to Germany just at the end of the Bush administration, and I was here when Obama was elected. And it was amazing to see how just that simple election changed so many things for me as an American living outside of the United States. And one of the things that I will say is I've spent a lot of my time, my life hasn't been that long, but I have spent a fair amount of time living outside of the United States. And during most of that time, I had this dirty secret that I was trying to hide from everyone, and that was the fact that I was an American, a North American. I was very, it was one of those things, you've probably heard many people when they were from the United States and they introduced themselves to this group over the week. They said, and actually I'm from the United States, and actually, kind of sort of an apologetic, but I'm not really from the, I don't really think that what you think, and maybe, there's definitely elements of apology in that presentation. So that was something I was really afraid of. And I decided to create this project, which was a platform to talk about my American identity and to talk about how other people encounter the United States. Because what I found is that so often I was getting stereotyped living in this small town in former East Germany. So often I would say, well, I'm from the United States, and there would be this look of, wait, but I agree with you, but wait, you don't support George Bush, but this is really blowing my mind. So, because there are these stereotypes and these things that get passed around without really having ever talked to people from that country, I thought, let's create an alternative platform for doing this. And it's a shame that you can find American culture all over the world, but I think it's the worst elements of American culture. McDonald's is horrible. I haven't eaten at a McDonald's in probably 17 years. But for some reason, that's it's kind of seen as like the American ambassador. Hollywood movies are not the truth. People from the United States don't think that's the truth, but that's the image that we send around the world. So it's really a shame, I think, that we are doing a lot of cultural outreach work, but it's not really hitting, I think, the most intimate and important things about American culture. So the way I feel about the United States, quite honestly speaking, I think of the United States like I think of my parents. I love my parents because they created me, but my parents embarrass me a lot. And sometimes they do things that I can't explain, and I wish they wouldn't have done them. And sometimes they say things and say things like, you shouldn't do X, Y, and Z, but then they're doing it themselves. And that's the challenge, I guess. So yes, I do, I'm not proud to be an American, but I'm also kind of, yeah, I can't deny it. This is who I am. And it does play a big part in my person. So anyhow, enough about me, now about my project. So that's where this project came from. And what I did is I created a mobile food cart, and I would go into the marketplace within Germany and in the United States, but of course, marketplace culture in the United States is a bit different. I can get to that later. With this mobile food cart, and I would cook excellent examples of home-cooked American food. And the food that I created was actually food that was, recipes have been donated through the organization website. You can see the URL down here at the bottom, usrepaid.org. So I was, sending out mass emails, send me your recipes, send me your best examples of American culture, and I'm going to cook them overseas, and we're going to start a conversation. And that's what I did. And the funniest thing that happened during this project is people always came up to me and said, well, what are you cooking, burgers every day? And I got the same thing from people living in the United States. Well, what kind of recipes do you want me to send? A burger isn't that complicated to cook. And then, I would always lead into this conversation of, well, what is the American identity? And how is all of the different ethnic variations of food that we have in the United States, how is that actually a very true representation of who we are as this melting pot image? So that was one conversation that was being started. But then also this food was being used, like you can see this table that's set up over here, food was being used to bring together people from all walks and cultures. And it was particularly interesting doing this project in Weimar because it's a small town in former East Germany. And so I found very often it was very helpful to have this tool of cooking and food and sort of public food performance happening in the market square. It was a very helpful tool in getting people to interact with me. So I'll give you an example of, this happened actually a couple times. A little old woman that grew up in Eastern Germany seeing me on the marketplace, and I was there 2 times a week for probably about 3 months. So we had enough time to kind of develop a trusting relationship. The first time, she stood back from a distance, read the sign, looked at what I was doing, went, and walked away. The second time, she came, watched me, stepped up to the pot that I was cooking in, looked inside, walked away. And it wasn't until, maybe a month into it that she was able to come over and say, well, what is it that you're cooking? Oh, well, my mom made something like that. Are you going to be here next week? Because if you're here next week, I'm going to bring you the recipe my mother used, and I'm going to bring the recipe I use, because I also make something sort of similar. And then that led to a conversation of, why do we have these similar things? And the world is a bit smaller sometimes than we think it is. And it was really because I had that prolonged interest and exposure in working on this market that I was able to develop some of these conversations and open up conversations that wouldn't have normally been able to happen, which I think is really an interesting part of that. Something that I'm going to go back. Something that I didn't mention is that I also did this project in the United States because I thought, it's a bit different in the United States because I feel the major message I have when I perform this work in the United States is that I want to introduce the idea of internationalism. And I want to find a place where Americans who are interested about what's happening in other parts of the world can have a conversation about that. And generally, people were fascinated. Americans are, generally speaking, very individualistic. But we also really care what other people are saying about us, no matter what the media says. So I had so many people come up to me saying, so what are they saying about us over in Europe? Is it really that bad? But great that they're wondering about it. And I think it's so important to think about what other places are thinking about the things, because America has United States has its hand in all of these different pies. I think it's really important that they're asking those sorts of questions. How is that image being diluted and redistributed around the world? So that also kind of introduces not just this idea of doing cultural diplomacy work from another culture, bringing that into the United States. I'm doing it in the United States context, I'm also kind of working with this idea of local cultures within the different cultures within the United States, but on a more localized level. Because of course, again, this melting pot idea, you have many different people from different cultures that are all living in one area, and the relations are, of course, not necessarily always perfect, and there's a lot more work we could do, diplomatic work we could do there. So this is a project that I also wanted to present to you. It's from Robert Farid Karimi, the cooking show Con Karimi y Camarades. And with this project, he's actually a poet, playwright, performer. And he stages this live cooking show. And he also films it at the same time. And it's this interactive cooking show where he has an audience like this, but he's making jokes and he's running around. And it's an interesting platform, but what he focuses on are these sometimes challenging cultural relationships within a local context. So for example, he's doing a project right now, what is it exactly called? Well, he's doing Diabetes for Democracy. So he's doing a project right now where he has been working in the southern part of the United States with Latino communities, first-generation Latino communities, and there's a very, urgent, it's become an urgent issue just with the Obama administration, but there's an urgent issue that there's so many young people that are now being diagnosed with diabetes because of obesity. And he's using his platform and his show to raise awareness about that and working with these Latino communities because his mother, I think, is actually from Colombia. So he also has this sort of, he has an ability to speak with the Latino community because he's kind of a part of it. And so, not saying that you don't have agency, but he's using his connection to it to establish a different platform. So he's working with those kids that have this kind of cultural conflict where, at home they're kind of being cooked and fed the things that that are more traditional to the culture in which their parents came from, but he wants to be an American kid, so he's doing the stereotypical idea of, we should go to McDonald's and we should eat all of this stereotypical American food, because he's trying to, fit in, and he's Karimi is saying that, trying to find a way of resolving that inner conflict and using healthy food as sort of a hybrid of these cultures that kids can understand and be involved in. And I'm very sorry that all of these projects have been in the United States that I've mentioned thus far. But I do know of one example of something similar that's happening in Germany. It's called the Neue Leipzig Occasion. Leipzig is a city in former East Germany. It's about an hour south of here. And this project was initiated by a Canadian, a Colombian, and a Serbian. And they were also kind of using their position as the other to engage with a diverse group of recent immigrant communities within Leipzig to ask them to cook together, and in cooking together, create a platform for possibly creating a new identity for that city, which I think is also an exciting idea. So I gave you a bunch of different projects, examples of projects and things that are going on that I think are really interesting. What I didn't go too much into is a lot of the theoretical side, and what do these things mean? Which, if you actually wanted to read my paper, I did do a bit more of that. My background is in art, but also communication studies. So I think a lot about the context in which I'm making work, and I think a lot about what is the message that's being created and how is that being received. So if you're interested in some of those questions, you might want to look at the paper. But I guess the overall thing that I was hoping to present is just this interesting way in which artists are using food and the idea of bringing people together in a very diplomatic way as an artistic media. And I think, food has huge potential. We all went to the Moroccan embassy and we saw how different that embassy experience was because there was that very gracious gesture of pouring tea and passing around small foods, and how a little bit of that sort of food as cultural diplomacy did go a long way, I think, in us having a very different experience there. So I'm just presenting. I think this is really an interesting idea. If you have examples of how similar projects are happening in the countries that you come from, I'd love to hear about them. And yeah, there's so much more I could say. And I'm not going to keep saying it because I'm actually, one of the major things that I do with the American Reputation Aid Project is I'm here to listen. Partially because of the language difficulties. I couldn't say that much when I first started, but I think it ended up being a very important part of that work, is I'm here to present a platform for us to have a conversation, and now I'm interested in hearing about what are some of your interests or concerns or questions. Yeah.
America and Canada. Like when I think about what I eat, like when I think about like home cooked meals, I think about chicken matzo ball soup, which isn't Canadian.
Or is it?
But exactly, like what is Canadian? And then the other day, which is embarrassing but hilarious, I laughed at myself. I asked the concierge where I could get like American kind of food, and she said, "What kind of food?" And I said, "I don't know, I'm sushi."
Awesome.
Like,
awesome.
But that is Canadian and American culture now, and it's funny.
It is.
It's hard to really, in my opinion, like when this woman came up to you and said that she had the same recipe, like what country did it really come from?
Yeah.
Where did that really originate? So I think that also every family, like their family came from somewhere, and that influenced the food that they eat.
Yeah, definitely.
Not a hamburger.
Yeah. I had this really interesting experience when I was doing that project in Weimar. That particular day, I decided to do donuts. And I was really trying to do not just sweet things, because that's the stereotype you have with a lot of American food, is it's all sugar, and especially in Germany, it's too sweet. They say, it's too sweet. But I was doing donuts because I thought, it's a fun adventure. And it worked really well on a market, in the market space. And it was so interesting. I had a mother visit with her 4-year-old daughter. And the daughter was asking these fantastic little kid questions, and she was like, "Mom, where do donuts come from?" And the mother explained to her 4-year-old in very simplistic ideas, well, I guess originally maybe they were from Denmark. but then they went over with immigrants that went to the United States, and the form of the donut changed, and now it's come back in this form. And so this is technically an American donut, but it's something that you kind of understand because it's similar to the Berliner. And the little girl got it right away, and it was so beautiful that that exchange happened between child and parent because of this food context. So I thought that was really interesting. Other thing that I wanted to mention that I think is really funny about the American Reputation Aid Society, and many Germans would also agree, is that I talk like the organization. I use the we like I'm a huge operation, but actually it's just me. And actually that's something that's, I think, really important to the work in that stage of it. And Germans laughed at me all the time because they're like, that is just such an American idea, that you can come to Germany and you can establish like a nonprofit or a group or a Verein with just one member. You're not a group, you're one person. But in some reason, like we laughed at ourselves together because of that idea. But I was working by myself, and I think it's also an important thing to look at, what is a small gesture that one person can throw into a community, and how does that small gesture help to activate the larger social imaginary and the larger way in which we imagine or understand our place in the larger society. So that was just some thoughts about what you brought up in your comment.
I wanted to share a project that was happening in Israel. Actually, the same curator of Plain that now I figure out that maybe he's a public curator. I don't know. He made an exhibition, a group exhibition about food, just like all kind of food, in very different materials, was photographs and pictures and drawings and stuff like that. But the unique thing was the fact that in the thing that you get, the catalog, he puts recipes inside. And to go into an art gallery just to see art about food, not eating, but getting out of it recipes was really, really different. Like people still have this catalog and talking about it, which in other cases, you're like, okay, that's a catalog. It was nice. It's nice pictures. If I'm not going to buy them, I have nothing to do with it. And in that case, you put the catalog in the kitchen, not in the library. And then you have art in your kitchen also, because the catalog is beautiful. So now when I kind of think of that, it's it helps me to understand why people are still talking about that. It was like 6 months ago. So that is one thing. And the other thing is this question about what defines art. When is it art? When is it community work? When it is communication between people? And I always also just extend the art's limits. But I think it is important that we make a difference. Like we say, now we are doing like a process of art, but this is art, this is photograph. And communication itself is also, but it's like I feel we need to think about that as social artists, as public artists, because I don't know why. If you have any thoughts.
I think that's an interesting challenge, especially because when you're working in this sort of public way, so much of the work that you do is very, very interdisciplinary. And so, when I'm preparing for projects, I'm reading things by scholars that work and teach in all fields, sociology, anthropology, economics. It's really kind of this hybrid of all of these things that are circulating in society, and returning to the idea of also kind of creating these as a mirror of the things that I'm seeing and as a way of looking at what's going on, but maybe processing it by yourself in your own way. Labels, I think it's hard. I mean, I think if you want to call yourself an artist, if you want to make art, that's great. Like, the more art, I think, the better. Sometimes art can, like the title of art, can really put people off also. And a lot of the art that I make, I want it to be accessible to everyone, And honestly, I also want it to be able to be understood. One of the major complaints I have with most contemporary art is you go to a contemporary art museum and you have to read a paragraph next to the piece that's this long in order to understand it. I read the paragraphs and then I understand the work and go, huh, that is an interesting idea. But it kind of upsets me because there's this disconnect. You know, this is then being prepared for a very specific art audience. And if someone were to just encounter it on the street,
Like wine. Like you have to know how to drink wine.
yeah, right. If someone were to just encounter it on the street, they wouldn't be able to interact from it or gain anything from it because they don't come from this very, let's face it, elite community of people that know about these things and are willing to learn. So even if you walked by the OSS food cart and just, you know, ordered a donut that day, you would be interacting with the project and helping to evolve the project in a more passive way, but it was at least, you know, one small step and you at least got something out of the exchange. If you didn't want to call it an art project, I was fine with that. Because that wasn't for me, that wasn't the most important work that was happening at the end of the day. But also the title of artist can help me to go different places. Like, actually it's funny, I was talking to Jay, the professor that presented on satire yesterday, and he said he decided to go into the theater because he was so good at so many things. He didn't want to decide. And he knew that if he decided to work in the theater, he could do whatever he wanted to because it would be under the title of art. And honestly, I'm exactly the same way. I was so interested in so many things, I decided if I call myself an artist, then I kind of get this little superhero cloak that says, I can do whatever I want to and talk about all the things. And that's really how I work and approach it.
Thank you. You were so sweet. Canadian sushi. That's so funny. Hello.
Mm-hmm.
This talk about you call it public art.
Mm-hmm.
It's also called community art.
Mm-hmm.
In my education, we call it community art. And I just want to remind you on Beuys. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but in the 60s already he redefined art for himself. He said it's not only what I am as an artist and a product that I'm bringing out, and then some elected people who understand it or might understand it can watch it in a museum, but he said basically everybody is an artist, and he started this, I don't know how you say it in English, but in German it's like social sculpture.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that he involved all the people, and he said let's do something together, and that brings back the power to the people to shape their life and their life circumstances. So I think from back then, for me, Beuys, and with his idea, that's kind of one of my idols that I'm going towards. So that fits very well in here. And for example, you asked for examples. I worked in a network group. Also, we were traveling around, and we had one project, a 3-year project in Wolfsburg, who, I don't know if you are familiar with this, the VW company is set there, the Fabrik. So they had a lot of immigrants in the 60s and 70s to come and work in the fabric there. And so they built a ghetto, one Westhagen it was called. And since, you know, it was the industry was going down, yet they didn't have the employment anymore, and the ghetto was getting poorer and poorer. So there was this thing between Wolfsburg, original Wolfsburg, and Westhagen village part, kind of, that there was the poor ones, the immigrants, and when there was a crime going on, it was for sure it was a person from Westhagen. And a lot of people left there. So they had a huge amount of empty apartments in high buildings, skyscrapers. And one in the center of Westhagen was actually called by the Westhagen people the Black Heart. The center of their village was, or their quarter was the Black Heart. And it was mostly empty. So what we did was, we were actually, within a period of 4 months, we were going to every door and talking to the people, inviting them, and we gave them little photo cameras and said, okay, you give us an image, you make a shot of what is happiness to you, what makes you happy. And we would collect them within, like, you know, a month or two,
and then make a Christmas calendar, a projectable Christmas calendar out of it. And so we had a countdown from 1st December until the 24th of December, where we had this gathering on the marketplace and projected these images on the skyscraper. You know, so the black heart turned into an imagery of happiness, of each person who had been included in this artistic process. And it was for them, obviously, first of all, they could show themselves. That's there. That's my picture.
Right.
But also, it was a gathering of people who would never come together because they didn't share anything other than, oh, we live in a really bad place. So it really shifted something for them. And that would be another example for community art, and to involve the people to get back the power to them. So that's one thing. And another thing, what I found really interesting, what you said about this, you came to the market for a longer period of time, and you mentioned actually that was a long enough time to build up a trustful relationship. And that's an interesting hint for me, because it's a new perspective now, that there's a difference. Sometimes you meet somebody and you click right away. And you say, oh yeah, great, And then sometimes you meet somebody and you don't click right away. And then I might think, or I recognize, I might think, oh yeah, no, this didn't work out, or they're not on the same wavelength or whatever. But maybe the factor of time, to just put in the factor of time and not shut myself up and say, oh, this didn't work, but say it didn't work in the first moment. And maybe this just needs the factor of time. So that was, I'm grateful for this thought.
Thank you. Would you like to respond?
So many things we should talk about here. I'm going to go to the last question about time, because I think that is a really interesting piece. And you know, there's one of the larger challenges I see right now in what's happening in contemporary art, especially as it is globalized, and it's more and more of contemporary artists are doing, I guess, sort of like these year odysseys, where they hop from residency to residency. I also can see the negative side of that. One side, it's great that we're getting artists from all over the world to experience different cultures. But on the other side, it's, I think, really hard to make an artwork that speaks to the population that you're trying to reach, the people that live there, if you don't know anything about the context in which you're working in. And what ends up happening is we're seeing a lot of artworks that are very personalized. So instead of, and actually if you're familiar with Boris Groys, he writes about this in his book Art Power, in which he argues that political art is dying because the art industry is becoming such a globalized thing that we don't have people that stay in one place long enough to really understand the politics of an area to the point where they can talk about it, and they can talk about it with an authentic voice, leading into what you're going to say. Which I think it's very, I agree with that. I think you do need to have an element of understanding for the context in which you're presenting a work in order for it to be something other than just, this is my reflections of a space after being here for 3 days. It becomes very narcissistic to me, I think, because it's a very inward idea of creating work that you hope speaks to someone, but you're really not familiar with the context in which you are working in.
Okay, no more questions. Not now. You've had one question. Unfortunately, we're running out of time.
Sorry, I just kept going.
So I would ask you to give one big round of applause again for Ms. Charlie Schmitt. Thank you. Thank you very much.